As you see, our team loves to empower women. We are four that work along with Tony. And so we definitely love the fact that we can bring this program to our membership this morning. And I wanted to share a few words about Lucy. So Lucy is the founder and CEO of Impact Consulting, and it is a minority and women-owned HR consulting and coaching firm. And they help organizations build more inclusive cultures, enhancing leadership capabilities, and drive sustainable growth. And so we appreciate Lucy taking the time this morning. And Lucy, go ahead and take the program. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you so much, CIANJ, and those of you that are in attendance and those of you that can be on camera. My next plug for please being on camera if you can. I start this discussion, I guess, coming from a place of being both grateful and excited. Grateful that we're having this conversation during Women's History Month, especially in light of the fact that for this year's theme, as it relates to Women's History Month, it's focused on highlighting women who are advocating on behalf of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and very specifically recognizing that women throughout the country are understanding the need and the importance of eliminating bias and then working towards both a society as well as workplaces that are more inclusive. And I should be very specific to say not only women, but women and allies of women, individuals who believe that equity and equality is a right and that all individuals should have access to opportunities. And so I am thrilled to be here. I have lots of experience in this space. So I come today representing Impact Consulting as the founder and CEO. I'm also a member of Columbia Bank, which is how I know the CIANJ community. That's how I met Columbia Bank, was through, and met CIANJ was through my connection at Columbia. I have the benefit of 25 years in human capital consulting and diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting specifically. And in my prior life, more than 9 years ago now, I was the former chief diversity officer for a large consultancy, Booz Allen Hamilton, headquartered in McLean, Virginia. I sit on the advisory board of several nonprofits. And why do I share that? I share that because philanthropy, community giving is very important to me personally. And I'm guessing to many of you also on the phone and on the call, based on what I've seen from various bios and events and activities and following some of you through LinkedIn. And so for me, it's great pleasure and pride that I take in this work. What I love most is our collective ability, not just mine, not just Impact Consulting, but our collective ability to be able to influence culture, to be able to work with amazing people that I am learning from each and every day, some of whom are on the call today, and also working together to help leaders become the best version of ourselves. We have one of our amazing coaches. I want to give a shout out to Amy Sheldon, who's on the line, who works day in and day out empowering leaders to become better leaders, and especially during points of transition in careers. And so again, Amy, thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for being here today. As a company, who we are and what we do, Impact Consulting is really in the business of transforming workplace culture through inclusive leadership. And so what we recognize is that leaders will set the tone and leaders will set the stage for everything that we do at organizations, right? Gone are the days where you can put things up on a vision board or speak about things on your website where individuals are not actually watching who is role modeling those behaviors. It's really important to have alignment between what we say as companies, whether we're small firms, whether we're mid-sized firms or large firms, what we say and what we do. And so for us at Impact, we work with organizations of all sizes to help them create an inclusive workplace culture that is driven through the work and the support of leaders and role modeling the way, and then ultimately looking at systems to be able to create more access and opportunities for everyone. And so with that, let me talk a little bit about the agenda today. So the thinking today is that we're going to provide a total of about 45 minutes of conversation that I will be leading and facilitating, but engaging you all, as I've just done right now, and then allowing a few minutes on the back end for any burning questions that we did not answer during the conversation and the first 45 minutes. Anything that we don't get to today, we commit to following up, not by end of day, because I do have something else to do right after this, but definitely by early next week, you will get a report out of any Q&A that came through after this session, as well as you will get a copy of the recording. So you have the benefit of the recording to go back and refer to and even share with some of your leaders. We're perfectly comfortable with you sharing it with other groups that you're members of. So today in particular, we're going to look at 4 different things. We're going to talk about insights and trends related to women in the workplace. What are we seeing at the national level? And is it the same or different than what we're seeing in the state of New Jersey? And the same or different than maybe what we're seeing in other regional areas? The same or different than maybe what we're seeing across industry? We're going to explore what are myths, enablers, and barriers that impact the careers of women. What helps us get ahead and advance? What creates better work-life experiences? And what gets in the way, right? Let's talk about that. We're going to share strategies and best practices for how to recruit, engage, retain women, right? So what could we be doing as best practices as companies, as an individuals? And by the way, this doesn't matter what size your organization is, and it doesn't matter what market you're in. And then lastly, as I mentioned before, as a result, Adriana, of your comment, is to ensure that we are building a community-wide call to action. We are hoping this is not the once and done. This conversation just happens to coincide with Women's History Month, but we absolutely want to engage in a dialogue that creates more systemic change and positive movement, not only for women, quite frankly, for anyone who isn't being seen, for anyone who isn't being heard, and for anyone who doesn't feel as if they don't have access to opportunities, right? This is really an open dialogue, despite the fact that we are focusing on women. And so I always start, as any good consultant would, with data, right? Because we recognize that information matters. Data is important. So I want to give you a few minutes to take a look at this chart, which is focusing on representation by gender and race of women. And this data, and really the bulk of this conversation today is anchored in some research from McKinsey and Company, global strategy consultant, who studies workforce and workplace issues amongst many things, not only nationally, but globally. And they produce a study that they've been producing now, I would say, I think this is year number 9, that was originally a study aligned with Sheryl Sandberg's work on Lean In, and it's focused on women in the workplace. And what we know is that today, at the national level, women represent over 50% of the professional workforce. Okay, so we have teetered to represent a higher proportion than our other genders in the workforce. Yet, despite the gains that women have achieved in representation, we're still finding that women, and in particular women of color, and women that maybe have other aspects of their intersectional identity, whether it be women with disabilities, whether it be women that are leading single family households, whether it be Latina women, African American women, women from the Middle East and Asia, et cetera, they continue to be, as a collective, as a group, we continue to be significantly underrepresented. In fact, women, by and large, while we represent over 50% of the professional workforce, we represent 1 in 4 C-suite positions, so senior executive level positions. And when you look further and you look at women of color, what you see is that number then drops to just 1 in 16. And so proportionally, we are there in overall representation, right, which is great. But there are some gaps because we are not progressing to senior levels at the same rate as our male counterparts. And then that begs the question as to why. Why is that happening? And by the way, this is not necessarily the fact or the truth for every industry, every field, but it is in fact the aggregate truth, right? So folks might say, hey, we know we have many more women in healthcare, or we know we have many more women in education. That's great. And then I would say, look at the senior most levels. Who are your executive teams making decisions? Who are the people that sit across your boardroom tables? And if you have the same level of representation, awesome. We're going to encourage you to lead the next discussion and get more of your colleagues and peers to do more of the same. But we know that there's a significant gap. And so we start there with context, because context does matter. And then we move into a conversation that says, well, if we know that women represent more than 50% of the workforce right now, and we also know that they're not highly represented or proportionally represented in executive leadership positions, why not? What's the gap? What are the barriers? And these are some of many of the barriers that year over year get reported, not only by McKinsey, but by other institutions who study gender and strategy for women in the workplace. And what we're seeing is that common barriers include things like representation and role models. If I don't see it, do I really believe I can be it? Or if I see it and what I see is the critical few that seem overwhelmed and not very happy in their careers, or somebody who's really overworked and stressed out, is that something I aspire to be? Yes or no? So that's one aspect. There's another aspect around work-life integration, and this is for anybody who's the primary caregiver, right? It's not necessarily just for women, because I have many friends that are colleagues that are men that lead into the role of being the primary caregiver. Our workplaces today are not necessarily set up with the right level of flexibility, even with a hybrid workplace that enables and allows work-life integration, right? And so folks are having to choose. Do I drop my kid off early at school or leave them with a babysitter or find somebody else to take them to school to attend that 8 a.m. meeting? Or do I dial in by phone? Or do I get there late, right? These are choices that business professionals are making every day. Gender bias and microaggressions, we're going to dig deeper into some of these in a few moments, but gender bias and microaggressions are real. So when folks say, what are you talking about? We treat everybody the same. Or one of my favorite, statements is, I don't see color. Lucy, when it comes to diversity, I don't see color. Everybody's the same. And so for me, I say, okay, that's a moment to maybe lean in and do a little bit of education, which says, if you don't see color, then the people in front of you are invisible. Because visibly, even on the screen, we see color, right? That matters. And so understanding and recognizing bias and microaggressions is really key. And we'll define microaggressions as well, because these are things that are showing up, whether they're implicit or explicit, whether they happen sometimes or most of the time, they're there. Pay equity. We are in 2024. If someone can put in the chat, or anyone can put in the chat, what proportion of pay, cents to dollar, are women earning in relation to their male colleagues? Who knows the answer to that? Or who can share the answer to that? With an approximation, how much are women earning, same role, same job, as their male colleagues on average? And Alicia, if you can help me out with the chat again, I'd appreciate it. Take a guess. Don't Google it, though. If you Google it, then you're not guessing.
Kim said 81 cents.
Okay. Thanks,
I
Kim.
think 20% less than a man.
Thank you, Adriana. So on average, yes, I forget if it's 81 or 83 cents, but that's about right. However, that is largely a statistic for white women. So if you look at our Latinas, of which I am one, that drops to something like 58 cents to the dollar. So how might that make people feel, right? If whether it be a white woman or a woman of color, we're earning anything less than our male colleagues for doing exactly the same job. Sometimes, quite frankly, even better. And I don't mean it male versus female, but we have some that are high performers, high achievers, working really hard at their careers, and yet we're being paid a fraction to the dollar. Why? Somebody's going to ask the question, why, right? So we continue to make progress, but I want to be clear that many times we think and we say, oh yeah, 80 cents to the dollar, well, we're better, because 10 years ago, we were 67 cents to the dollar. Better, but not so much. The movement is very slow. And so pay equity and pay parity is a critical barrier for women in the workplace. Similarly, career, there's this notion around career opportunities, career advancement, what's visible and what's invisible. Who pulls people into opportunities? Well, if I'm part of a network that's particularly of one kind, whatever that kind is, am I naturally going to think about who's not in the room? Oh my gosh, yeah, I just realized I've been having dinners and business meetings with all women that are about my age, that are in the same profession. Did I ever think that maybe I should include male colleagues or vice versa, right? To open up the aperture of what it is and who it is that I'm bringing into my network. And so for career advancement, we're seeing stalls for women, and we're going to talk about that as well. And then lastly, culture and sponsorship. And I add those together because businesses as built were built in a way that does not necessarily match today's times. And I see a couple of younger generations on the line. And so I think we'll learn from our younger generations that says what worked for my parents isn't going to work for me. And even those of us that have been in the workforce for a long time get smarter over time, gain more wisdom. And what do we say? Hey, what I did then and the sacrifices I made then, I probably won't make now because life is too precious. And so I want to be able to do great work. I want to be able to advance, and it should not come at the compromise of my family. I should not have to deal with a harsh workplace where people are disrespectful. And by the way, if I'm doing a great job, why wouldn't I expect that a senior partner at my firm wouldn't want to sponsor me and put me on partner track, right? And what do I need to do to get there? And so these are some of the high-level barriers. Now, the good news for us as women, the good news for us as male allies is that while these barriers persist, there are areas where we're getting better. And oh, by the way, we always know that with increased awareness and action, not just awareness and action, we can move the needle on equity and inclusion. And that's really the goal of this conversation today. Is there anything on the list that's not there that you thought might be there for those of you that are on the call that you want to put in the chat? Anything else you see as kind of a systemic barrier that, oh, let's talk about this? I'm sorry.
Aging woman has less opportunities.
There you go. So age bias is a thing, Adriana. Thank you. So generational diversity is a thing. And I would argue it's a thing on both ends. It's a really important big thing as you get more senior and more tenured in your career, and you're viewed as being potentially, quote unquote, aged out. It's equally a barrier when you're junior in your career or younger in your career, where potentially the bias is you don't have the experience, you don't have the knowledge because you haven't been in the workforce here long enough. And so we need to balance that, but absolutely generational. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Thank you. Anything else? I'm gonna keep going. All right, now I'd like you to share in the chat. We're gonna figure out which of these statements are a myth or a reality and why. So the question is, since the pandemic, women are becoming less ambitious. Myth or reality? Just put in the chat, please. Myth or reality?
Sí.
Myth. We have 3 myths.
Okay.
David reality.
Okay.
Amy myth. Adriana myth.
Okay. So lots of myths. We'll keep
All
going.
myths. Correct.
All right. Awesome. So myth number 1, women are becoming less ambitious. That is correct. Reality. The reality is that women are actually more ambitious year over year on the study since the pandemic. And largely that's because the flexibility has almost fueled that ambition. When people were given the opportunity and the requirement, quite frankly, to work from home as a result of the pandemic, guess what? We recognized a couple of things. We recognized that, well, not only is my career important to me, but I can do my career from home my way. And with that, many women and men alike have found that they became more creative, they became more resourceful, they started to think about other aspects of their life or different ways to show up for their career than they had not done before. They also began to engage with a much broader virtual community of other men and women and began to learn from people that otherwise wouldn't have been part of their natural professional network. Because when you go into an office every day and when you're working with the same people all the time, and then you're commuting home, especially if you live in the state of New Jersey and you're sitting in traffic, the reality is the last thing you want to do is go online and begin to connect with people professionally on LinkedIn or other professional networks. Well, as a result of the pandemic, what happened was more women were leaning in to say, hey, I'm going to find that professional community. We're going to network. We're going to support each other. And absolutely, I'm interested in getting promoted. So let me think creatively about how to get that done. So as you can see the stats, 96% view their career as important. 82% highly interested in getting promoted. The ratio, by the way, the percentage is even higher for our Gen Z. So for our youngest generation in the workforce, their percentage of wanting to get promoted is upwards of 90+%. So the interesting thing, very high expectations. I'm in the workforce, but I'm ready for my next promotion next week, kind of a thing. So people are pushing for promotion. And then in addition to that, what we're finding is that overall, the ambitions of women have gone up, while the ambitions of men have either stayed the same or in some instances come down a little bit. That's a direct proportional result of the pandemic. So let's look at the second one to share in the chat, please. The biggest barrier to a woman's advancement is the glass ceiling. Is the glass ceiling. And the question would be, is that a myth or is that a reality? Is that a myth or a reality? And for the benefit of those who might not know, I don't want to assume everybody knows what glass ceiling is. What is the glass ceiling? The glass ceiling is a term that was used dating back to the 1970s that basically represents social barriers, social systemic organizational barriers that prevent women from being promoted to top jobs. Right. And then over time, it became a broader thing that said it's not only women, it's what are those ceilings that sometimes are invisible? It's not like you really see a glass ceiling. Sometimes they're invisible. But you know what? I think back and I think despite my best efforts, and I know I've been there, I'm not getting promoted. Why not? Despite my contributions, it seems like things are harder for me than somebody else who might be a peer. Why? So myth or reality? You can put that in the chat, and Alicia, let me know what we have.
So in the chat so far, we have reality from Francis, Sally, David, Adriana, and Mary.
Okay, got it. So you all feel it's reality. Well, guess what? Yes, it's one of those yes and. Yes and. The reality is it's less around these days, it's less around the glass ceiling and more related to the broken rung. And for some of you thinking, what the heck is the broken rung? The broken rung is really that first level into management, that first level into management. It is where women are facing the greatest obstacle. And they're facing it for different reasons. They're facing it because potentially the support isn't there. They're facing it because they may be asked to work twice as hard than the next person for that role. They're facing it because they don't see role models who have sort of been there before them. So in general, it's an actual positioning of pay close attention as business leaders and as individuals driving your own careers. Pay close attention for when you're ready to move into the management slot and the management role, that you have the right level of support to help enable your career advancement, that you have the right mentorship in place, that you have the right sponsorship in place. As a company, that you're looking for ways to mentor and sponsor and advocate on behalf of professionals that are moving from individual contributor to manager. So glass ceiling is still evident, but the biggest barrier right now is that very specific position into management, which is the broken rung. Okay. And what we do know when you look at the stats, it's a little bit sobering, right? So for every 100 men promoted, as referenced in this study, and by the way, this study included more than 900 companies, over 450,000 survey responses. And so what we're finding is for every 100 men promoted, about 54 Black women are promoted and about 91 white women are promoted. And then, you know, for other race and ethnicities, they fall in between. It's a big gap, right? And what do we know? Bias is a strong driver. What happens when people are coming into those management positions? Sometimes they're, you know, roughly within the age range of mid to late 20s to mid to late 30s, right? And as folks are coming into those roles, what potentially is a bias? What do you think might be a bias of what leaders might be thinking? This individual as a woman is coming into this role. What might hold them back in their career? What do you think leaders might be thinking? You can put that in the chat. That would be great. What might leaders be thinking as a bias? I'll take the first answer, Alicia.
Going to leave and have children.
There you go. That's the number one reason. And so as a company, as a manager, as a leader, am I going to make my investment in Taurine if I believe that in 5 years, Taurine is going to move on to have children? Or am I going to make my investment, I'll make somebody, Alan, who I believe is already established in their career, has a family, and is not going to leave me? Where am I going to make the choice, right? These are real decisions. And so this is both for us to be aware and for our managers and leaders to be aware, so that if these biases are there, we can find a way to mitigate them. The third item I'm going to ask you about to share in the chat is microaggressions. And so what microaggressions are these demeaning, dismissive comments, typically directed at a marginalized group. So any underrepresented group, in this case, we're talking about women. While we're high in representation, we know we're underrepresented in senior positions. And so the question is, do microaggressions have a small impact on women? Myth or reality? Myth or reality?
So far, we have myth from David and Sally.
Mhm. David and Sally, can one of you come off mute if you don't mind and tell me why you think it's a myth? Out of curiosity, why do you think it's a myth?
Because I've seen it happen. Just comments. There was this one situation where a woman that I had a long, close relationship with at work was told that the reason she didn't get a promotion and someone else did is because they thought this guy could sort of have better control over this sort of boys club that he was going to be like overseeing. Anyway, that was, there's a variety of things that were bad about that whole situation.
Thank you. No, David, thank you so much for sharing that comment. And in fact, I think the women that are on the call, many of us, myself included, sort of attempted to roll our eyes. I had to come back into the conversation, but you're absolutely right. It happens all the time. And it's not a small impact. It has a large and lasting and significant impact. I remember hearing someone one time say that microaggressions was sort of like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And that always stuck with me, because when you're hearing it, when you're feeling it, whether it's around, as we said here with your example, male versus female for a role and why, or whether it's around accent and how somebody sounds, or whether it's because of age, there are these assumptions and biases that are built up. Maybe it's even around experience. My only experience or exposure to a given community is X based on historical perspective. And so now everybody I look at that meets that demographic, I have a certain perspective around. I build a certain bias around. Right? I come from the inner city of New York. I come from one of the lowest socioeconomic zip codes, not as much anymore, but back when I was growing up, across the United States. I am sure there were many people that underestimated my abilities because of my zip code, 07454, right? And so it's really important to understand what these microaggressions are, how they harm the welfare and well-being, especially of women. And if you happen to be in an intersectional identity that goes, obviously, most of us are, whether you're a woman of color, a mom, a single mom, somebody with a disability, somebody who's a member of the LGBTQ community, somebody who comes from a different country and speaks a different language or has a different accent, or practices a different religion, or is from a different political party, right? There are different ways and reasons, especially today in this environment, where microaggressions are showing up. And sometimes they are more obvious than not. Whereas in the past, they used to be subtle. Like you would walk away from a meeting thinking, did I really hear that? Or did I really see that? Now they're much more overt, and they're having significant and negative outcomes, as you see there with the stats, specifically at women, right? Some negative outcomes that we have to consider as organizations. So
Can I
thank
say
you.
something?
Please.
Is it okay to say something?
Yes,
Okay.
of course, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, with the dismissive comments, sometimes it's the things that aren't said that are the microaggressions. Like, I know when growing my career, especially being in a couple of male-dominated industries, the men would come in and take the seats at the front of the boardroom, closest to the speaker, and the women, historically, we'd be in the back. And then once that's set, I found myself automatically going to the back. And it wasn't until a female leader said, come sit up here, that, I felt like I was worthy of taking a seat. But, it's already dismissing who we are before
Right.
the meeting even starts.
Wow, I love that. These examples, by the way, keep them coming. I'm not even going to do Q&A at the end. We'll do them in real time. But the examples, please keep them coming, because that's so powerful. You had a leader there who brought one other person along, which was you, right?
Mhm.
Because to your point, they had already created these conscious or unconscious elements of what's said, not said, and behavior patterns that we may be recognizing, but we're falling into. But it takes a leader, and that's a leader, whether it was a woman or a man, a leader to recognize it and bring somebody else along, right?
Right.
If we're only a leader for ourselves, it only gets us half the way there.
Right. And then we have to pay it forward.
Exactly right. That would be the ask. That would be the
And
hope and the ask.
feeling okay with it, that it's okay.
I love that. Thank you, Kim. That's a great example. Let's talk about myth number 4. It's mostly women who want and benefit from flexible work. Myth or reality? It's mostly women who want and benefit from flexible work. Alicia, what have we got?
We have myths from Kim and Adriana.
Anybody else? Or the rest of you
And
playing along with
Mary.
us? And who else?
Mary,
Okay.
Eglandro,
Okay. All myths right now?
all myths.
Excellent. Okay, here we go. So, myth, you're absolutely right. All gender identities, and if you notice, I put all gender identities because we do have a transgender community and we want to be mindful and respectful that they too are part of the workforce and they too have identities and they too align and relate to wanting and needing more flexibility. It has shown up, especially since the pandemic, has gone up exponentially as in the top 3 biggest priorities that individuals are looking for from their employers. They're saying it's really important to our success as individuals. And if we're successful and if we're feeling whole and if we're feeling sound, we're going to be able to produce better work. We're going to be able to innovate more. We're going to be able to better represent the brand. And so not everybody is saying I want to work full-time remote all the time. In fact, I have a couple of clients who have younger children. I'm like, oh my gosh, Lucy, like I don't want to be at home at all because it's a lot to manage. I have individuals that are more introverts that say, hey, I want to be in a workplace because I thrive in a workplace environment. And then again, this is one of those areas that for Gen Z and for people that are new to companies, I'm new to a company. How do I absorb the company culture if I'm not there? Like people don't even know I exist, right? Or if I'm a new person, I do want to meet people. And so we have to balance that going back to, I think, Adriana, when you mentioned generations, the generational layer of this conversation is really important. Today, we have 5 generations in the workforce, right? Each of those 5 generations, based on life stage, have very different needs. Some overlap, but some do not. And so we have to be very mindful of that as well. And so knowing what we know, right, about the myths and the barriers, what are some ways that we can support and advance women in the workplace? And here, the recognition for these solutions are very much solutions that we as a firm, Impact Consulting, help our clients. When we work with clients on advancing culture and creating a culture of inclusion and creating managers and leaders that are better managers and leaders to be able to empower and enable their workforce, these tend to be 5 of the top 10 areas we focus on. So one is around representation, one is around empowering managers, one is about addressing microaggressions. Let's get them to stop, and let's get them to stop now. One is about providing more flexibility, and one is related to fixing the broken rung. Everything can be fixed if we pay time and attention to it, right? We know anything and everything that's a gap can be fixed. It just needs a certain level of effort. So on the next few slides, and there's Amy, on the next few slides, we have a little bit more detail. And again, at the end, we'll give you our information. If you want to connect, we'll also share a copy of the slides with you. But what are we doing to track outcomes to improve women's experience and progression when it comes to careers? What are we doing, right? If you're not measuring it, guess what? You're never going to know if you're making progress. And I'm going to, based on my 25 years of experience, tell you that you're probably not going to measure. You're not going to get progress if you're not measuring, right? So what gets measured gets done. Remember that. And so please, I encourage you to get a sense of, from a company perspective, as to what are those outcomes? What are those experiences? How are people really feeling? Let's not assume everything is great. Let's ask. Let's ask through a survey. Let's ask through informal chats. Let's find out, because it's only in knowing that we can fix the trouble spots. Create an intersectional approach. As I mentioned before, I'm not just one person. You're not just one person. You know, in my case, I'm a woman. I'm a Latina. I'm a mom, I'm an entrepreneur, I live in New Jersey. There's lots going on in my life, and whatever workplace experience that I'm currently living, it likely impacts all of those various dimensions of who I am. And then to the extent that you can increase awareness and visibility around internal goals and metrics. So what's the organization doing and who's delivering against it? Is somebody else taking the credit for our work? Or are we advocating and others advocating, the example, Kim, that you gave, are others advocating on our behalf? So again, representation matters. Empowering managers Priscilla's on this one, empowering managers works as well, right? So supporting and rewarding managers as key drivers of organizational change. So it's both when you're doing it well, I want to acknowledge and I want to showcase what you're doing so that everybody could follow as a role model. Similarly, when you're not doing it well, I don't care how great a producer you are, I'm going to call you to the side and let you know this is important to us. And so we've got a certain set of accountabilities that we want from managers. When Adriana mentioned there's certain leaders that I'm not seeing showing up as leaders, we want to make sure that managers and leaders have the skills, quote unquote, the training they need to be successful. What are we asking them to do? What are we asking them to do differently? And then we want to make sure that managers have time and support in both coaching and resources to get it done right. Addressing microaggressions head on, take steps to put an end to it. That comes with education. That comes with clear signaling that this is not acceptable. So if I'm in a meeting and Alicia on my team walks out early and another team member rolls his or her eyes and says, well, there she goes again because she's got a baby to pick up, I'm going to stop the conversation. And I, as a leader, I'm going to say, and yes, she does. And as an organization with flexible work-life policies, we encourage her to do that because we would never want somebody to have to choose between their work and their family, right? And we also know that those that step away to pick up kids and do things probably work twice as hard after hours to make up for it, right? So as long as the work is getting done, I think we can all afford a little flexibility in that example. But microaggressions like that need to be stopped. Some people will say it and walk away and other people are shocked by it, but they don't address it. We've got to lean in and be able to address it in a respectful way, but stop those comments when they're happening. So either we take on the role of advocating for ourselves or others in the room, even if it didn't happen to you, consider advocating for someone else. Whether it's in the moment, I know this is sometimes uncomfortable, it may not necessarily be in the moment, it might be something that we do offline, right? But the key is to have the conversation so that you create a culture and a workspace that's safe. Providing flexibility, that means different things to different people, right? We're a consultancy. We are able to work in different locations, including home, to support our clients. We realize that not every role enables someone to work or allows someone to work remotely or that flexible. Certain roles, I'm reminded by Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is one of our clients, and the port says, you know, Lucy, there's certain roles, they've got to be there, right? Drivers of buses have got to be there. They can't work remote on any given day. They've got to be sort of behind the wheel. And so establishing clear expectations and norms around what we mean when we say work flexibly and who's entitled to it is really important. And put those safeguards in place to ensure there's some consistency. What doesn't feel right to people, using that example of the bus driver, is if there are 10 bus drivers and 3 of them get to work from home every other week or not come into the office and the others do, how does that make people feel, right? So having more transparency as it relates to flexibility is important. Fixing the broken rung sooner rather than later, in particular with a focus on women of color. That is the most significant gap. Everybody can benefit from fixing the broken rung, but we often look to say, okay, where do we have the biggest need? And right now it's focused largely on women of color. And so looking at your inputs and your outcomes. Who are you hiring? What level of support are you providing them? Are they on track for promotion? Whose role is it to help support them? I mean, everybody owns their own career, right? As professionals, we own our own career. But as managers and leaders, we play a role in helping people advance their career. So ensuring that as an organization, you have career advancement for women, which includes mentorship and sponsorship. And please take advantage of us as a resource. You know, I'll share my information, mentorship programs, sponsorship programs, the stuff that we've done for other clients that we are happy to share to get you started in thinking about how you implement this within your own organizations. And then as I wind down, call to action. I've been saying a lot, right? You hear my words. I hope you hear my energy behind this topic. I could do this all day long because I really think we're at a place where every one of us on this call, there's a reason why you're here. And so we would love nothing more than you to consider how it is that you advocate for yourself, if you're a woman, for other women as women and as allies of women, right? How do you advocate for yourself in the workplace? And I would love for you to be reflective and think about what is at least one call to action and try to make it bold, right? It could be small, but also try to make it bold. Like, is there something that's been gnawing at you that you just haven't either had the confidence or the courage to raise? Is there something that maybe seems small and maybe not even impacting you, but impacting another woman on your team, like a microaggression? You're going to create space to talk about it. Doesn't matter to us what it is, but the thinking is that if each one of us lean into this topic, we're going to make our workplaces for everybody much better. And that's really the goal. The goal here is not to make somebody wrong and somebody right. It's saying we all can and should strive for better workplaces. We all can and should strive for opportunities that we'd like to achieve over time, right? And we all can and should support one another, bring others along. Kim, you said it right when you said we have a responsibility to pay it forward. That's the responsibility for each and every one of us. So if you can please take some time to think through the call of action. For those of you that are going to connect with us either on social or via email, I'd love to hear what your call of action is, because maybe we can get a group follow-on conversation going from this discussion. On behalf of myself and the Impact team, and we're going to leave a couple of minutes for open questions, anybody that stays on, I want to thank you all for joining this conversation, taking time out of your valuable time to be with us today. I provided some contact information there in the event that you are interested in more resources. If this topic was of interest to you and you're like, gosh, I'd like to do more in the space of diversity. I'd like to do more in, with respect to advocating for this topic in the workplace. Let us know. You can contact us via our team email account or through our website. And then we also took the liberty of putting the code in there if you want to connect with us on LinkedIn.